Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
From today, prosecutors will treat online hate crimes as seriously as face-to-face abuse. The Crown Prosecution Service has updated its rules following a rise in the number of cases. A hate crime is when someone is motivated by prejudice about a person's disability, race, religion, sexual orientation or transgender identity when offending. The CPS says it will prosecute these crimes with the same robust approach used with offline offending, while recognising that children may not appreciate the potential harm and seriousness of their communications. The CPS's Director of Public Prosecutions, Alison Saunders, said today that many hate crimes were underreported.
There are two things that we've launched today. One is internal guidance for prosecutors to make sure that they're aware of all the different things that they need to take into account in relation to the different specific strands of hate crime, and also to make sure that we are asking for a sentence uplift where we are convicting individuals, but also their public-facing statements and also a social media campaign that we're launching today, Hate Crime Matters. That's important because we know this is a crime that's underreported. Sometimes people feel that they just have to sort of put up with it. It's something that happens to them because they're disabled, because they are gay, and because they're a particular religion. And that's absolutely not the case. So we're really encouraging people to think about the behaviours that are shown to them and to think about reporting things which will be a hate crime.
Well, last month, some MPs told us about trolling and abusive language they regularly received, some of which does fall into the category of a hate crime. Let's hear from them.
Caroline Ansell is as bad as ISIS and Hitler.
Cat Smith should be lynched.
At Rupert Huck, you Talibanic! Exclamation mark.
Tory scum.
Eat in hell, you Tory witch.
Get out of my country, you ugly racist! Exclamation mark. Ugly, smelly Muslim vermin.
Tory scum.
Want to see your head swinging from Tower Bridge.
Simon Hart, you're a go get in the bin. I hope you stand in dog.
You Muslim fascist. We voted Brexit and Article 50 is going to get triggered anyway.
And so it carries on.
Well, joining us now is Paul Tucock, who is from the LGBT rights charity Stonewall. We're also joined in the studio by Olivia Attwood, who has been the victim of vicious abuse since appearing on Love Island. This is her first TV interview talking about it. Welcome, both of you. And also joining us from elsewhere is Sheila Atim, who's been racially abused in public many times, but never online. Good morning to you as well. Thank you very much for joining us. Olivia, welcome.
Hi.
Tell us what sort of abuse you've received.
So when I was on the show, unfortunately, a lot of the abuse was directed at my family because obviously I was in the bubble of Love Island. And since I came out, it's all been online. A lot of it I couldn't repeat on breakfast television.
Can you give us a sort of censored version? Give us a flavour.
It's pretty severe. It's death threats. It's people, personal comments. It's quite extreme.
Death threats?
Yeah.
How many?
A significant amount.
And what do they say?
Just things like, you should die and...
But why do they hate you so much? What do they say in the message?
There's not specific reasons, as say. I think it's people that watch the show and they feel like they know you from watching a certain hour, and then they want to sort of express how they feel to you, and because they are hiding behind a keyboard, it's being able to get that sort of really severe opinion across that they believe there are no consequences to, which often there aren't.
Did you feel threatened, though?
I've made a conscious effort to try and not let it affect me. I went into the industry with my eyes open, and unfortunately, before I came into the industry, I was warned this is something that you will have to put up with, and I'm not the only cast member that has faced this. And I think that's so sad that you go and work in the public eye and you're kind of warned you will have to tolerate this kind of behaviour is quite an issue, that we normalise it to that extent.
Even so, what impact has it had on you?
It has been upsetting, and be wrong to say it hasn't. But for me, I'm quite thick-skinned. Someone who wasn't the same makeup as me the effect it could have on them emotionally and mentally is devastating. So
you say that you were told to expect it and you kind of just try to ignore it. Is there anything, though, that you have thought, actually, you probably should report it? Would you report stuff?
There are things, yeah, that I look at and I think, is this normal? Are you meant to just sort of see this and just pretend you haven't seen it? But then I think, I mean, what we're talking about today is like, you don't really know what you're meant to do when you see it and who you are meant to talk to, because it is so normalised and you see it so much. Like, I get it, but I see so many people in the industry who do what I do get the same sort of messages and the same sort of comments, and it is sort of those things you are sort of programmed to just believe that is quite normal.
Would you report anything? Would you report something to the police?
If I felt that I felt a genuine threat to like my life, my safety, then I would, yes.
But you say you've had death threats, but you wouldn't report
those. The thing
those.
is, when it's like that online, because you see this kind of stuff quite often. You don't. I personally try not to take it literally. I hope it is just what you see on there. But for someone else, that might not be the case.
Paul, where would you draw the line in terms of what should be reported?
I would say that if you feel you've been intimidated, and certainly if you're receiving threats online, they should be reported. And I think what you're saying, Olivia, is absolutely right. It depends on the individual, but actually you shouldn't have to just grin and bear this sort of intimidation. It can go in online spaces, you can have a mob intimidating you. And if you imagine that in the street, you would report that. So I think we should think about the equivalence, and if we don't crack down on online hate crime, this will get worse and it will seep into other forms of hate crime.
And that's what I was wondering, actually. Is there a direct link between someone doing something online and then actually feeling emboldened to speak out, or is it, as Olivia says, someone sort of sitting, you know, quietly at a keyboard feeling like actually there's sort of that they'll get away with it, it'll be fine, and it remains kind of defined? I
don't know if there's... I haven't read any research which shows that direct link, but I think if you think through common sense, that if we say it's permissible to have this sort of hatred online, then people will feel emboldened and feel like, actually, this is permissible in society. And online spaces are so important in our society now, in our communities, that we should be cracking down on this hate online, where it is actually more prevalent than in the streets, because we don't want to increase hate crime in our streets as well.
Olivia, have you had face-to-face abuse as well? No,
I haven't, luckily. Mine, and that's the confusing thing about these situations. All the reaction I've had in public and face-to-face has been positive and nice, so it doesn't match up. So there's something quite wrong there. Do you know, there's a whole sort of community of people online that feel so passionately against me in this way, but when I'm out my day-to-day life, it's all positive and people are lovely. So it doesn't weigh up.
Let's bring in, actually, at this point then, Sheila, because Sheila has had abuse face-to-face but not online. What's your experience been, Sheila?
Yeah, you know, obviously I'm a black woman, so I have experienced racism ever since I was a child. In the street, you know, you get people shouting stuff at you out of cars. It can really come at any point, you know. You get, I mean, I remember myself and one of my best friends, who's also a black woman, were confronted by people in the street just because they felt like that at that point in time. They saw us and they saw us as a target. I've had it on the train. You know, you get it at work sometimes. I mean, it's kind of a regular occurrence. Do
you think it is right to treat online abuse as harshly as offline?
Absolutely. Even though I haven't been a victim of online abuse myself, I have friends who have been victims of online abuse, and I've witnessed the online abuse that a lot of people who are in the public eye receive. And it can be just as psychologically taxing and damaging as real-life abuse. I mean, even though I've learned to get through life, you still take it with you. And I think it can actually be quite frightening to know that somebody who is not in any close proximity to you still has a way of reaching you and getting to you. That's quite frightening.
Paul, do you think I mean, if someone is saying something online that they wouldn't say to someone's face, do they perhaps just really not realise the impact of, presumably they don't realise the impact of what they're doing, but also actually how serious an issue it is? I mean, particularly with kids, actually, because obviously, you know, kids can potentially say anything online and not necessarily realise that what they're doing would equate to a crime.
I think it's important that that's why we need to treat online hate crime as seriously. I mean, if you think about kids as well, there's terrible bullying in our schools still. Over half of lesbian, gay, bi and trans young people are bullied in schools. So there is still an important lesson to be learned, whether somebody is a child or an adult, that this is never acceptable, that it does create psychological damage and intimidation, and people shouldn't feel like they can't be who they are, they can't live their lives because of somebody else's violence or hatred towards them.
So what's the way to deal with it then if kids are doing the sort of thing you're talking about?
Well, I mean,
does it become a crime issue immediately? Do police get involved?
No, obviously. I mean, you can see in the guidelines from the CPS that people's age are taken into account, but that doesn't mean we should let that lie. Certainly, all the work we do with schools is about educating children to think about the impact of what they're doing to their peers.
Michael Lindo has tweeted, say, we're in the slippery slopes of censorship. How will they balance this with the right of free speech? What do you think, Olivia, about the right of people to have free speech, say whatever they like online, versus censorship?
I think it is not a thin line. I mean, I'm known for being quite opinionated myself, and there is a line between being opinionated and abusing someone. You can say you don't like someone, or you don't agree with the things they do, but to be personal and to be threatening is two different things. Having an opinion on someone, watching a show and being like, do you know what, I'm really not keen on that person, that show, and I didn't like what they did in this episode, and writing that you want bad things to happen to them and their family, and that's not an opinion. There's a massive difference between that.
So if it's right for people to be pulled up then where they do this and it has an impact, is it right for someone like you to then turn around online and turn it back on them, or better to ignore, which sounds like the strategy that you have been following?
I choose not to engage in it, because I think a lot as well with people online, especially keyboard warriors where reality TV is concerned, they actually want to engage you. They feel like they know you because they've watched you for an hour every day, and they write you, and what they would like is a reply to then go back and forth with you. I'm not going to use like precious energy in a day to do that with someone that's chosen to write into one of my social media accounts and give them that platform at all.
After today, with the CPS saying that they want part of the thing going forward is for people to feel actually emboldened to report online abuse if it is appropriate.
Yes.
Does it make you feel differently about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it needs to come to a point where, speaking to other people who've been in a situation I have after being on TV, and we are normalising it, and it's like, oh yeah, I've had these messages, oh yeah, I've had these messages too, and we're all just acting like it's normal. That's a problem, and there needs to be something in place where when it happens to you, there's someone you can speak to, and you don't feel like you're overreacting, and these be like a number you can call, and it can be dealt with where it's in the appropriate way, and you feel like that's your lifeline as such, to be like, look, I've had this message, what should I do? And someone can advise you on that.
Do people stop when you ignore them?
Yeah, on the whole. I mean, for me, like I said, when I was in the show, when I was in the villa, my family and friends were running my social media accounts. It was relentless. So in a lot of ways, it was terrible for them because they took the burden of it, and I was sort of ignorant to it on the show. And they didn't stop. It was more because they had to block people and delete accounts, etc. When I came out of the show and I'm a real person back in the same world as everyone else, it did massively taper off, and people can see, okay, she's a normal girl, she was on a show, blah, blah. And it has got a lot less. But for them, it was terrible.
Sheila, it's an interesting point about Olivia saying people sort of have the distinction where she's on television and online that she's not a real person, and in person they're different. You've experienced something completely different to that, where people are just rude to you face to face. Do you ever report it?
No, I'm sad to say I don't. I think both online and offline, it's something that we believe we are supposed to learn to adapt to. It's something that we believe we're supposed to just grow a thick skin around and accept. And I think, everyone on this show is absolutely right in the fact that actually we don't have to accept this. There is the option for us to complain about it and to get some justice behind it. And I think also a big part of the reason why people experience a difference in real life to online is because these people are emboldened, they're behind a screen, they feel protected, they feel anonymous. And even though I have had face-to-face abuse, there were incidences where people, you know, shouting out cars is kind of the equivalent because that person is driving away, whereas I'm walking on the street, so I'm never going to really know who that person was. They're gone within a few seconds. So I think it's absolutely important, absolutely.
Sheila, Olivia, Paul, thank you all very much indeed for joining us. And
now, the government's warning that the country's top firms are not prepared for cyber attacks. 68% of board members in the FTSE 350 are not trained to deal with cyber attacks. That's according to a new government survey. Fire chiefs say thousands of dangerous white goods are still being used across homes in the UK. Now, hate crimes carried out on social media must be taken as seriously as offline offences. That's according to new guidelines from prosecutors. The Crown Prosecution Service policy statements have now been updated to take into account the increasing amount of cases triggered by online abuse, including racism and transphobia. OK, well, let's speak to the comedian and activist Kate Smurthwaite, who joins us now. And Kate, I have to say, I am no stranger to your Twitter account and your Twitter feed. You have indeed experienced a lot of abuse online. What is your reaction to what the Crown Prosecution Service are trying to do about this?
Well, it sounds like great news. First of all, it seems like it shouldn't need saying that just because something arrives as a tweet, it's somehow different to something that arrives in a letter or that somebody says to you. The fact is, we live a lot of our lives online these days. There was a time when you could say, oh, just switch it off. That is long gone. It's simply not possible these days to be engaged with, you know, modern society and your friends and all this kind of stuff without being online. So we need to make sure that we take what happens online seriously. There's never going to be a time when you can take every single piece of abuse that somebody like me receives and go through a full prosecution process simply because there's way too much of it. But if we do take the worst cases, the most extreme things, the death and rape threats that I get, take some of those and actually go through the court process and actually see people getting punished, I think a lot of other people out there will think twice before they go ahead and do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, Kate, as I said, I'm very familiar with your Twitter feed. Follow you, I see exactly the abuse that you receive. Explain to those who don't exactly what kind of online abuse you receive. But then also, I'd really like to talk about that definition. You were talking about it just briefly earlier. What defines hate speech when it comes to people talking, disagreeing over something, having views that people won't necessarily agree on? How can you actually define that hate speech? But as I say, talk to us about what you have received online first.
Yeah, so in terms of what I receive online, I think of internet abuse for me as like wallpaper. Like there will be some in whatever direction I look. I know I shouldn't spend my afternoon staring at it, but occasionally you realise you are. I receive hundreds of messages every week, and I don't go a week without a death threat or a rape threat or something like that. So yeah, I think it's very difficult to draw the line. I think absolutely it can be, you know, you get into an argument, you start to sort of escalate what you're saying. It's absolutely a difficult line to draw, but we can be very clear that if someone is threatening to kill someone, if someone is threatening to be violent to someone, if someone is threatening to rape someone, well, clearly that's unacceptable. So at very least, let's deal with that. And then there are also sort of perhaps more broader things where people are inciting hatred on the basis of things like, you know, race, gender, sexuality, all those kind of things. I don't think it's ever going to be a straightforward line to draw, but it's also a line that we shouldn't just back away from and go, well, let's not try and draw it. It seems complicated. We need to kind of step up, and actually this is a great first step, and I'm sure going forward the CPS will need to clarify and will need to make little tweaks, because the last thing I want is, you know, is somebody making a light-hearted joke at an airport suddenly, you know, surrounded by half a dozen armed guards. I couldn't be more against that sort of thing if I tried, but there has to be, you know, a line that's drawn in order to make sure that people can express themselves online and not feel that they're going to be threatened and intimidated when they do. Especially young people starting to get a toe in the water of politics, go online, express themselves. Suddenly there's a tsunami of abuse. We need to make sure that that's not the world that we're bringing young people up into.
I mean, is this something that the Crown Prosecution Service should be coming in and dealing with, or is this something that indeed social media companies should be taking a hold of and dealing with? Because if you look, it doesn't necessarily happen across all social media firms. There's one in particular where you post pictures you don't necessarily find the same level of social abuse as opposed to other social media companies. I'm not sure why that is or what that is. I don't know if it is because of the social media company, but should it be social media firms coming in and taking more of a stand in terms of how people do communicate? And this isn't something necessarily for the Crown Prosecution Service to get involved with here.
I think it's something that we have to look at all different levels. And yes, there is definitely stuff that the CPS can do, especially when it comes to, I mean, if somebody is sending me death threats, you know, that shouldn't be a matter for sort of like, oh, let's ring up Twitter and block somebody. That should clearly be a matter for, that is illegal behaviour. That's not acceptable. We should be jumping in my view, at the CPS level. But can internet companies do more to protect people? Yes, they absolutely can. And is there a differential between different platforms in terms of how much abuse you experience? Yes, absolutely. You know, for example, Facebook, where it is much harder to be anonymous, you get much less abuse on a platform like Facebook, whereas other platforms, for example, messages on YouTube, things like that, which are essentially not really moderated in any way unless you choose to go through and do it by hand yourself. You get a lot more abuse on there and a lot more stuff. And of course, I not only have the videos that I've put up, but on YouTube you'll get other people putting up hate videos about me, and then underneath that you'll see again like streams and streams of nasty messages, and sometimes really frightening things like revealing a part of my home address, that kind of stuff, which of course, again, then you've got to get straight onto the social media companies and try and sort it out. And we all know, all those of us that receive this kind of abuse, that some social media companies are much better at this than others. And I think that those that are behind the curve can totally learn. And hopefully, once the CPS is doing something, the CPS will be able to turn to social media companies and say, hey, look, your system isn't a great system for dealing with this. Let's talk to you about how you can do this better. You know, and I mean, there's lots more levels at which we can deal with this as well. I think we know from the way internet abuse works that we all know somebody who is kind of doing it, and we all know somebody who ends up on Twitter or on Facebook getting into arguments for 9 days at a time and saying nasty things. And actually, we can all be a part of saying, hold on, we don't talk like that, we don't use that language, that's not okay. So there's lots of levels that we can all be involved in bringing an end to this.
Lots of levels indeed. Be really interesting to see if this indeed does change the way we communicate online. I'm Kate Smurthwaite speaking to us from Edinburgh. Yeah. Good talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, hate crime carried out on social media must be taken seriously as offline offences. That's according to new guidelines for prosecutors. Now, the Crown Prosecution Service policy statements have now been updated to take into account the increasing amount of cases triggered by online abuse, including racism and transphobia. Well, to get more of this, is this going to be a welcome move or a restriction on freedom of speech? Let's speak to Adam Rawcliffe. Now, he's from the Institute of Ideas, and let's also talk to Tris Reed-Smith. He's the editor of Gay Star News. And both of you, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Let me start by asking Adam, what are your views on this? Lots of debate on whether indeed this will be an infringement of the freedom of speech. What are your thoughts?
So yeah, I think this is an attack on free speech. I think free speech has to be an absolute. People frequently today in politics and the media always say, I believe in free speech, but then clarify it with a but. Alison Saunders herself, the Director of Public Prosecutions, in her Guardian article today, used those very words. I think free speech has to be no if, no buts. We can't have any clarifications. I think we need free speech because we need to attack, defend our own ideas. We need to not lean on moral orthodoxies. I think transphobia, homophobia, racism, sexism are all bad things, but I think the way to defeat those ideas is not to ban the often pathetic people who voice those opinions online, but it's to engage in debate with them, interrogate their ideas and ultimately defeat them.
I mean, Tris, Adam does have a point in regards to the kind of things that are said online, the kind of things that people disagree with. Maybe it's the sort of thing you don't want to hear, but it is defining when that changes from free speech to actually becoming hate speech.
And the great thing about this is we don't have to redefine it. We've already defined it in law and in practice, which has been out there for some time. First off, I should say that as a journalist myself and as a gay man, free speech is absolutely vital to my life. My life would be miserable without free speech. It would possibly be intolerable without free speech. So I'm as keen to defend it as anybody else. But there's always been restrictions. So where that stops being just someone commenting, even controversially commenting, and starts being someone threatening someone. I mean, I've got a journalist who's was told to repent or die on social media. So where it becomes a death threat, where it becomes hatred, where it becomes intimidation or violence or obscenity, then I think that there has always been rules and restrictions around our freedom. Freedom is governed by responsibility. That's what our laws here do. And while there's nuance, and we should continue to debate these things endlessly, and I'm very grateful actually to people like Adam who advocate for freedom of speech, because it is so important to us. It can't be entirely unrestricted.
I mean, that is the problem, isn't it, Adam? The right to free speech doesn't mean the right to hate speech, and sometimes people forget that.
I think it's difficult. You're always asked, when you're asked this question, it's always where do you draw the line? I think with these new guidelines, we're at risk with giving the CPS and the criminal justice system more broadly the opportunity to draw their own line on what is free speech and what is hate speech. I think it has to be an absolute, because once you start taking away free speech from some people, you can take it away from anyone. As an advocate of free speech, I'm an advocate of absolute free speech, because you never know when someone is going to turn the censor against you, when someone's going to silence you. So it's all very well being part of the winning crowd now, being part of the crowd where you're being able to silence people, but you never know when the moral orthodoxy might change. I think we do have a responsibility, as Tris says, but I think that comes from every citizen in society to bear their own free speech and their own responsibility to defend their own ideas, to argue for what they think is right. I think that's where responsibility comes into it. We all need to speak up and defeat these bad ideas, and not just reach for the censor and lazy bans.
I mean, Tris, is this something that the Crown Prosecution Service should be owning, should be taking control of? Or rather, is it something that social media firms should be doing? It's been a failure on their part, and so it's them that should be stepping up to tackle any kind of hate speech, any kind of hate rhetoric online.
Look, if I had endless sense of faith in the corporate world, I would say let's trust companies to run everything. You know, they're very efficient at it and they're very good at it. Sadly, I don't think that social media companies have always managed to tackle these things. I don't think they've applied enough resources to stopping trolling, just as I don't think they've applied enough resources to stop things like child pornography creeping onto online. So I think that we have to have a legal fallback for this. Now, where possible, I do hope the social media companies will step up to their responsibilities, and I hope that they'll be led by the public, who fundamentally do want there to be vigorous and, as I say, controversial debate online. Nobody wants to silence that, but don't want people to be threatening someone's life. And it's important to recognise what that does to people. But just in case anybody thinks I'm being rather shrill about this, people are driven to depression. People are driven even to suicide. We know of kids who are driven to suicide merely because they've been so hounded and bullied by trolls online. People are driven to really fear for walking out on the streets. We've heard that even amongst politicians who have been threatened online with death threats and so on. So again, if we can tackle it online, we save it spilling out into the streets. And in a sense, the dangers you encounter online are no less hurtful than you might from some random person passing you in the street and shouting out something abusive to you.
Adam Rawcliffe and Tris Reed-Smith, I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there. Really good talking to you. I'm sure this debate will definitely be raging on. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Prosecutors in England and Wales have been told to treat hate crimes committed on social media as seriously as any others. New guidelines from the Crown Prosecution Service say hate crimes have a corrosive effect on society, warning that the internet has provided new platforms for abusive behaviour. Porrick O'Brien has this.
It's not okay for somebody to abuse you.
In February, this young Labour councillor in East London gave a speech at the European Youth Parliament.
Anyway, may I continue, please? The lover of democracy, can I continue?
You didn't have to agree with her on the refugee crisis to acknowledge the performance as a barnstormer. A good moment for democracy and debate.
And I also mean that by your welcoming, your lack of welcoming to these people.
The clip went viral. Then, the abuse.
Words hurt. I don't know where this whole sticks and stones may break my bones or wherever, you know, that saying comes from, because words do hurt. I've never ever been called the N-word in my life, and then I was called the N-word 3 times in 20 minutes when I was like, okay, this is not okay. And when I was told by people to ignore it, I was like, actually, why am I ignoring this? We wouldn't ignore it in real life.
For a young woman who uses social media to engage with the residents she works for as well as her friends, the abuse became all pervasive. She was encouraged to report it to the police. Today, the Crown Prosecution Service are doing the same.
People should recognise that hate crime occurs both online and offline, and no matter where it occurs, people should feel confident to come forward to report it.
They're not the same, though, are they?
Well, I don't see why not, because the impact...
Because there's a possible immediate physical threat if I'm standing in front of you, whereas that isn't there necessarily if I'm doing it 100 miles away in my bedsit.
No, but of course people don't necessarily know that. People and victims will very clearly tell you that they feel in fear of their lives from online threats. There should be no difference in our response, whether it's online or offline. Charges may be different, sentence may be different, but there should be no difference in the way in which we take that into account.
Last year, a record 62,500 hate crimes were recorded by the police in England and Wales, an increase of 19% from the year before. However, over the same period, police referred fewer hate crime cases. Referrals to the CPS from police dropped almost 10%.
To what extent is the message you're sending out today directed at police forces when you look at a figure like that?
Well, it's to everyone. We know this crime is underreported, so we would like to see more people report, but also it's setting out the guidance very clearly about when we will prosecute, which helps, of course, police colleagues.
Last year was also a record year for the CPS as they prosecuted just under 15,500 hate crimes, up almost 5% on the previous year. And there was a marked increase in cases where people convicted of hate crimes got a tougher sentence. The CPS is walking a tightrope here between clamping down on hate versus strangling free speech.
So we need to challenge those words.
This young politician, though, welcomes the guidance. There's a lot more than just abuse in her inbox. Younger people asking her about a career in politics.
Why should I put myself out there wanting to help people through politics and engaging in democracy to be abused?
And what was your message to them?
I said, please don't give up. Don't let the bullies win. There are more people that will support you and love you and encourage you than there are the hate.
Warwick O'Brien reporting.